This is Drunk on Software. We're at Mistral in Redwood Shores with Dipock Das from Oracle. Cheers. It's good to be here.
Cheers. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for being on. We're drinking some mojitos today, talking about software, because we're getting drunk on software. Great.
I wish we'd filmed our lunch. It was pretty good. You would have enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Conversation was good.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have that conversation again.
Should we start with Harry Potter?
Let's start with Harry Potter though, because this isn't just about software. We like to talk about things that just geeks like. One of those things being Harry Potter.
One of those things is Harry Potter in 3D on the IMAX.
First 12 minutes.
So if you go to Harry Potter IMAX 3D, what should you know, Dipock?
You should know that unfortunately, the first 12 minutes are in 3D. I held out. I wanted to go see Harry Potter straight away, but I made everybody wait until they actually brought it on the IMAX in 3D.
Yeah.
It's like delayed.
So you waited, and that's hard to do with Harry Potter.
We've always been there on the opening night as much as we could be.
Yeah.
So we got there, we've been queuing for quite some time, and we got settled in, got some great seats, and then they made the announcement. Very disappointing that the whole film wasn't in 3D. Still a great film.
Now, would you have been more disappointed if they told you at the end? I mean, I guess you would have noticed it, but
I don't know. The film would have been a bit fuzzy for the rest.
So you had to take
the 2 hours and 20 odd minutes.
That would be great. At the end, you walk up and say, like, "I want a refund. The last hour and 59 minutes was completely blurry."
You might not realize. Well, you know what?
On.
You might not realize, and you might have actually made an appointment with the opticians. Gone and got yourself a pair of glasses unnecessarily.
I can't drive home. My vision's blurred. Is this like writing a Flash-based login to a Struts application? You get excited, you're thinking this is going to be cool, and then you get dumped into, crud hell.
That was a great transition into complete geekdom.
I was looking for one. I didn't think it was going to work.
I think you could make a 3D Flash-based UI. I was reading the Maker Fair.
I think they
showing how you can make 3D images from like 2 pictures. You could do that. They're just slightly apart.
Yeah.
Just have to have the special glasses on.
Is it like the augmented reality?
Augmented reality with 3D glasses, and this is what the world
really cheap 3D glasses. In '92, I saw Xerox demonstrate this virtual room, and you had to have these glasses on, and this guy has just this user interface all over the place, and he's just grabbing stuff.
Wow.
Those guys were great, but I never saw the technology of it.
Jobs wasn't there to steal that idea.
Unfortunately. So Microsoft wasn't there to
So we were talking about Microsoft earlier. I think this is an interesting place to start. We were talking about the ribbon and the UI innovation of the ribbon.
James, for those that don't know, what is the ribbon?
Oh, the ribbon. The ribbon in Office 2000, what is it,
2007.
Some of us aren't Macs, so we didn't know about the ribbon.
You've never experienced
someone
the ribbon.
told us about the ribbon.
This would be a good trivia question a few years down the road is, do you know what the ribbon is?
Yeah, you can get a free t-shirt, but we don't have them yet.
It's odd that they didn't feel they had to do a ribbon for the Mac. I just saw the Mac Office software recently. It looks completely different.
There's no ribbon.
I was actually sitting through, bizarrely, Excel presentation, which is weird as a developer. And the guy asked who's on the latest Office, and I raised my hand. He's like, "So you know all about the ribbon?" And I was like, I guess I have a different version. It felt really silly. So not knowing the Excel guy's questions.
That's embarrassing actually. But so we were talking about how software grows in complexity all the time, and the way that Microsoft chose to deal with that complexity was to add the ribbon. But the side effect of what they did by hiding some of the complexity was to make it really hard to find where stuff is.
Because I think they made the assumption that they knew what people were using. Right? I think they were trying, their goals, their intentions were correct, that they wanted to try and make it easier to use a product.
For sure.
But the UI, the design was cosmetic to a certain degree, and it was just about massive. If we've got all these menu options and it's really complex, why don't we just hide them and try and just simplify, the ribbon rather than making it, well, why can't the user customize it for the things they use very easy, make that task easier. I think they focus on just making it, this is our standard user set, and this is how we as product developers
Right.
user interface should look.
Right. And I think the other thing that these same sorts of people do is that they'll build wizards. We hide complexity through wizards, but neither are the best way, right?
No, I think that, where software's starting to improve definitely is where it starts to learn from the user behavior. And we were talking about this earlier, is if you look at what the Opera browser did, it looked at the common websites you went to, and it kind of gave you a gallery of 9 little palettes or jumping points. Go straight to those websites. So you didn't have to immediately go to your bookmarks.
Right.
And then obviously Google Chrome followed the same pattern,
Right.
and then Safari's got the same thing now. So that's pretty good, and it's kind of the start of software that understands the user,
Right.
rather than being dictated by individual product managers, or by the business themselves, or by the SI who chooses to implement software.
So do you think that kind of with the shift that's happening around RA, we're getting closer to being able to deliver those kind of applications, or is that still the super ninja development team that's able to bring those features to their users?
I think it's more possible today than it ever was, and that's because RIA tends to solve the hard technical problems that we've been trying to overcome over the last really 10 years since we went to the web.
Yeah.
We went to the web and we lost all of the end user functionality, and it's been a long time. Different approaches, some of them were proprietary in nature, some of them were standard-based, but I think those problems are generally addressed. A library, you can use Flex, SDK has all of these features in there, you can use JSF, all these libraries are trying to deal with the basic technology problems. The challenge now is for people to think about user experiences and learning user interfaces that learn.
So that's interesting. So you think back to late 90s through mid 2000s. What do we call them? The 2000s.
I was reading a thing where they said we still haven't found a name, and the decade's over in 6 months. That unnamed decade.
Yeah.
What's the best movie of the unnamed decade?
So we spent essentially 7 years or so just solving a lot of the technical problems with moving to the web. But now that we've solved a lot of those technical problems, we've solved the deployment issues, we've solved state issues. We now are freeing up our developer time to focus more on how to improve the actual user experience.
Yeah, I think the other thing is the maturity of those applications. I do think certainly a lot of enterprise applications tend to be designed the same way. They're kind of standard pattern, but businesses are starting to realize that there's more that could be put into a user interface now. There's more information that could be conveyed to the user. There are ways of presenting the user interface that doesn't really require that much training. I mean, you look at social networks, things like Facebook and Twitter. Nobody had to have any training on how to use those.
I hope you don't need training on Twitter. You just have to.
Well, some people need training on what not to do on Twitter, right?
Isn't it what not to say on Twitter?
What not to say.
I didn't know what the whole RT thing meant for a while.
I still don't, because I'm tweet free.
I'm a tweet virgin. That's
actually I got ridiculed for my
sticker you can put on your laptop.
Well, I got ridiculed for my advocacy of using Twitter as a kind of communication channel, but I think people are beginning to realize, and businesses realizing that it's actually a great way to communicate. And it's a user interface of sorts. The Twitter user interface isn't great, but one thing that they did really, really well was expose an API to let you access the core value of the product.
It spurred a lot of great Air apps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Air apps.
Fantastic. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. Some of the apps have been built with there.
Yeah. One of the interesting things to me about Twitter, this is totally off topic, but it's intrigued me, and we just have mass planes flying over.
It's like
we're going to have to speak up so they can hear us. One of the things that interests me,
it's not a studio. we don't have.
Yeah, this is not fake.
Was that Larry's plane?
I think that was Mr. Ellison.
No, that's too small.
He's not allowed to land.
He's not allowed. So, no, this actually does get into what we were talking about earlier and how business and technology go together. But one of the things that intrigues me about Twitter is all the system failures they had over those first year or two, and how as a business, and as a business, it hasn't affected them.
Yeah.
their goals in terms of getting adoption. I mean, I'm not talking about how they get revenue, but in getting adoption, the technology isn't perfect. And I think as technologists, we so often argue about how you have to put all the scale.
But now, does this apply to?
all these
Now,
things.
this is a question for Dipock. Does that apply to enterprise software? If people's Siebel instances were down, or whatever CRM system they're using is down as frequently as Twitter is that a problem?
It's a serious problem, right? And
They're paying customers.
It is
It's a
a
measurable
serious
problem.
problem.
It's any enterprise application. If you're running your business,
This is business critical stuff.
Yeah, you can't take orders, for example. You can't process orders in the web. You can't do your forecast. It affects everything. And there's clear and measurable things, metrics around, how much downtime costs it is. And this affects everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're on premise or SaaS based.
Right.
The rules are the same.
But as a service provider, I think it's different if you're in a space with a lot of competition. But if you're innovating, and I'm not arguing against building scalable, well-architected systems. I'm absolutely for that. I just think as technologists, sometimes we overplay how important that is, particularly when we're innovating. If you're Twitter and you're the only option in the space, people don't have anywhere else to go, right?
Yeah.
I'm not. I think there is a competition on enterprise software.
I think what's fair is to, hold your hand up and say you'll never ever release a perfect system.
Exactly.
Not in generation 1 and maybe not in generation 10. But
Yeah, and I
the
think
question is what you're delivering, is it compelling enough? And then also, is the downtime, first of all, noticeable? Doesn't matter
What's
if the
the cost?
infrastructure goes down if nobody notices.
Right.
If the response time is affected maybe by a few milliseconds, does anyone notice? And when does that downtime occur?
Right.
So there's different rules for different businesses, and it depends when they're doing business as well, like when you're taking messenger orders and stuff. So if you have a compelling business value, then there's obviously a certain tolerance level. When it comes to things like payments, and you
When it comes to
about
taking money,
PayPal, taking money and stuff,
People
and
don't-
getting revenue, then
Which PayPal was just down like a few days ago, wasn't
Yeah,
it? And people
absolutely.
were irate because they couldn't take orders, and I mean it was like
can't
a
take
really
orders,
big deal.
you can't get business, then business is going out of business.
But isn't there, even in that model, isn't there more of a direct cost to the service provider and losing the transaction fees? Like, if I have a non-payment
You mean people aren't
transaction-based
gonna leave
system,
PayPal and
as
go
a
somewhere
provider,
else?
No,
I may have SLAs and things that require me to pay something, but in theory,
But it doesn't cost them as much as the business that was trying to take the business.
oh, absolutely.
So it never hurts them as much.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Kind of straight off user interface. And the ribbon.
Yeah. Yes. The
Or did we
ribbon.
close off on the ribbon?
Yeah, we kind
Well, I
of
think
went on
we
a
wanna
rabbit
get
trail there. It was
into,
a
like-
good rabbit trail. but-
Yeah.
I do think we want to kind of move from the ribbon to the business value of RAA and the technical and how that innovation matters. And I mean, the ribbon's kind of interesting, but other than kind of picking on it,
Well, it wasn't that. I mean, it was just
Liz.
that was the focus.
Great. Thank you so much. Great.
You want me to
Thanks,
take
Liz.
empty glasses?
Do you want any other?
Oh, sure.
Do we need one more?
No, I think we're good.
need one more.
No, you want more.
Is that me?
Yeah, that's
All right.
yours.
Where's yours?
That's yours? Do you want one more?
I'm driving.
We need
I'm
one
the
more.
designated driver, so
Okay.
no, I'm good.
orange whip, three orange whips.
What's
Well,
that from?
That is from what's the movie with John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd?
Blues Brothers.
Blues Brothers.
Brothers. That's from Blues
What
Brothers.
was the quote again?
Orange whip, three orange whips.
That's great.
And my friend BJ will now have to watch this episode, and he can't fast forward. So,
Okay.
and he's not a geek,
Fantastic.
so he doesn't.
He's got to watch the
He's
whole
a philosophy
first 10 minutes.
PhD student, so he'll enjoy this conversation.
Absolutely. So the business value of RA. So obviously, we talked about how the ribbon wizards were trying to hide complexity. So is there really value that RAs bring that's not just the ribbon value, the wizard value of hiding complexity through new UIs? Is there actually value beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think, like we kind of started to talk about the immediate problems they were trying to address. Going to the web is about a distribution problem for businesses, for enterprises. That's why they transform from client server to web architecture. And I think what the promise of RAA is that you can actually start to think about different user interfaces altogether. Right? So I think if you look at enterprise apps and you go back, the web rendering of the enterprise application is pretty much like the client server app of the old
Right.
days.
Yep.
You know, I can
spit markup to
you know,
some client that can render.
That's right. I mean, it essentially looks the same. And Salesforce looks like, you know, a Siebel app back in you know, the late 90s or something.
Right.
You know, I think what's interesting, you know, what's happened over that time is that things like analytics have come into play, and we used to use analytics a lot to track user movements on the web. Well, those are things that are starting to come into the applications as well, and it's very important to understand how the user is behaving and reacting to the user interface.
Right.
In task completion rate, for example.
Right. Yeah.
Even things that maybe we didn't think about in enterprise software in the early days about cognitive processes, the way that people think, the way that the distance a mouse has to travel, which is why a lot of businesses want to use keyboard control. Those things are very important, and you know, ultimately it helps an end user finish a task.
Right.
You can finish it much faster.
Well, and planning for interruptions and that sort of thing too is
I mean,
probably
things like
huge.
pausing UI, not having to serve timeout.
Right.
It's kind of really critical and stuff.
Do you end up using the analytics to optimize how the app's built and
Yeah, I mean,
evolve it?
but I think that the analytics have tended to be focused on really an operational, both looking at the data and maybe looking at the user behavior, but actually providing analytics to the end user is actually one form of feedback, which is something that I think RIAs are very good at doing, and actually giving the user some kind of indication. You know, you've got, just like with email, you've got 15 unread emails or something, or just when you log into an application, you've got 10 tasks undone, or you've got something I just noticed in the Google Calendar is that there was some new gadgets I could add into the UI, and it said your next appointment is in 1 hour and 3 minutes, which is cool.
Yeah.
Which is the great thing about the web,
yeah.
which you know I've been using Outlook forever, and I just look back and said, you know, the Outlook client hasn't changed. You know, it's just the calendar. Yeah, they added the ability to add internet calendars. I mean, it's a great product, but I've never had this gadget in my Outlook UI. It says your next meeting
The extensibility.
is in 10 minutes,
Yeah.
right, or something.
Yeah.
And you know, and maybe even here at your upcoming events as well.
Yeah.
There's another gadget.
That is one of the really interesting things that, this is kind of a side note, but one of the interesting things that the web has done for us is bring in this kind of mashup, or the ability to modify through plugins, like we were just talking about WordPress plugins earlier today, like this kind of hackability of the software, which in Outlook, I mean, you can write a plugin for Outlook, but
you have to be
there's a handful out there. They're probably not easy to write. They probably can't do too much tweaking of the actual UI.
Well, plus the technology that is built, and this isn't a knock on the technology, but it tends to be disruptive in the sense that it will destabilize Outlook. So if you add a plugin into Outlook, it can affect the functioning of the rest of the application.
Right.
Whereas, with a web app, generally it's kind of isolated, depending on the frameworks you're using. The other thing is that most of those products tend to be driven by a business or a product, an application group. They're kind of trying to predetermine, and this was the issue really with the ribbon, in that they're trying to predetermine what people are using.
Yeah.
And I think people are more, certainly people are using enterprise apps today, are more sophisticated than they were. I mean, if I think about salespeople, they're more used to configuring things themselves. They may use software that's not been approved by their business, and they're quite happy to kind of get stuff and do very simple plugins. Not that they're writing code, but they'll use NetVibes and iGoogle and things like that to create their own mashup.
They want some level of customization.
That's right.
And I think one of the things we were talking about earlier is that, like, take the ribbon for example. I don't even know if it's possible to customize the ribbon.
Yeah, it is.
It is, but they didn't make that task easy. So I didn't actually customize the main ribbon, but I customized the panel of it with just the functions I use. In PowerPoint, there's just some basic functions I'll always use, and some great features in the product. But one of the things that they missed really was the whole element and idea of collaboration. And that was the other thing that's, the ribbon thing and the usability kind of detracted from maybe some of the other things they could have done with Office.
So they innovated in the wrong spot.
I don't think they realized that the sharing was as critical a release feature.
I think I've heard the next version, whatever they're calling
the web-based version.
Or no, the new version they're talking about the next version of Office. They're working on more on collaboration.
It's like
So it's interesting.
focusing on-
I think I've noticed that that's.
I think, but a lot of
that's a
it
huge
kind of
need.
requires you to collaborate with Microsoft Stack, which is kind of fair.
Yeah.
You're trying to upsell shared.
As expected.
But that has a kind of a challenge with it as well, because you have to put it in place.
Right.
So I'm not sure what the web version will be like,
Yeah.
but it's no real barriers to entry, no real hurdles to learn and stuff, and
Yeah.
it's really compact.
As when you're developing an app, especially feature-rich application like that, don't you have to make that determination in some way of what you're gonna put in the user's face and what? I mean, it seems like a kind of a difficult decision, I think, in terms of where how you're gonna present those
Well, and
kind
to
of
please
features to the
people that
user.
are like technical users like us, and people that are totally on the other end of the spectrum.
Well, just that if you have a lot of features, eventually you're.
Well, first of all, you
I guess it's
you're cursed with knowledge because you know more than the users, right? And also, you may also be cursed with being the parent of the product. So you never want to see your feature die. You always want to see your thing being prominent. But what you really need are folks who come from the outside that say, well, these are the things we're using.
Yeah.
Which typically they're the customers. of
Couldn't
the
you use
SI.
analytics for that too? To have
Yeah,
actual
absolutely.
information
Yeah,
on.
absolutely. And that would be more of an impartial thing. But then even then, it's it depends what you choose to expose, and it depends how people find the features and the functions.
Well, and it also depends on how you choose to interpret the data. If you
You could say it's a usability problem that no one's using your product. Absolutely, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can
So it could be
interpret
that it just
the
isn't the one
analytics
product we're
information to
We're getting more
totally.
conversions because you have to have an account before you can download our product.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of ways that people can interpret the data to justify what they want it to mean. But it is certainly better to have data than to have no data.
Absolutely.
And if you're open to seeing what the data really means, then
Yeah, and I think that's critical, especially in any kind of, whether you're an application developer or a business. If you're a business and you're deploying software, it doesn't matter what kind of software it is. If the users aren't using it, then your project's a failure.
yeah,
Right. And actually, one thing I've noticed is that quite often it's not a problem of the technology, but in the design of the application or the implementation,
right.
where assumptions are made by the development group, the development teams. People will instinctively know how to use this UI,
Right.
right? And the other problem is basic training.
Yeah.
Not of how to use the application, but the value of using the application.
Right.
So people didn't need training for Twitter because they all got value from it, right?
Yeah.
You can post something, and everybody else who's interested in hearing about it will hear about it.
Well, and I think I've heard you say in the past that the only reason why most people that use SFA or CRM applications, the reason why they use it is because that's the only way they get their commission.
Absolutely. So they're forced to use it rather than seeing that there's actual value in managing this information, looking at an account. I used to look, obviously worked at Dipock for many years and in sales for a certain amount of time. And whenever I used to go and visit customers, I'd look at the account profile, customer profile, I'd look at the track record, I'd look at the technology stack, and I'd try and understand what are the key issues
Right.
for them, regardless of what the sales team would tell me.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of value from the information that people put in the CRM system.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people who were told, you could turn up to the office one day and told to use product X or product Y without being told what the value is for that.
Right. Well, one of the things that you guys did that I really thought was great, which seems completely obvious, but I'm sure there's not many people doing this, is that in your new gadgets, your Siebel gadgets, you allow people to initiate a phone call, a sales phone call from the gadget. But when you actually initiate that phone call or an email, right, it actually then logs back into Siebel that they did that. And so they don't have to go in and manually enter that information. So that's value for me. That's saving me time. I'm not having to remember to go in and to Siebel and enter that information. It's just being entered automatically.
Yeah.
So that's something that has a direct correlation to value for me inside of one of these applications.
Yeah, I think that's the promise of RIA. When you stop thinking about the technology and one technology over another, one framework over another, you start thinking about the user experience, and you start thinking about well, how can I improve this operation? Something as simple as making a phone call or talking to a contact, and you look, software and computers and technologies was always supposed to be about automation in the paperless office.
Yeah.
And yet I see even new products today being released everywhere that really focus it's great about the technology, but they actually force the user to do an awful lot more stuff.
Yeah.
There was an open source, it was an Air app called Snatter, and it had a fantastic feature in there where you could, what he does is it tracks your RSS feeds,
Right.
and you just put any RSS feed in there, and it will kind of scroll up the screen.
Right.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the guy open sourced it, so
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
One of the cool things he did, right, was because it's an Air app, it integrates to the clipboard, and so it's able to, you could just highlight an RSS feed and you do copy, and then you went to the Snatter application and it was already there. Because he basically cut the operation down, like
cool.
50%,
That's
removed
great.
one of the tasks.
Yeah.
It's already done.
Well, and probably even more than 50% because you have to go find the place in the application, you have to click some button
Paste.
to go add it, and then you have to go paste it. It's not
Well,
like,
he kind of, he just figured.
Yeah.
He figured out you wouldn't have to do it.
That's
But
great.
it's that kind of concept that I think that people can start to leverage in real. So we just recently did this on a product that we're building right now, where you can just highlight some text because you're interested,
Yeah.
and it immediately starts a feed discussion.
That's great.
It just
Yeah.
posts to a URL.
It just knows,
And it just knows this is the way that software should evolve,
Right.
just to become more intuitive, and not to worry about round trips to servers.
Right.
And
Well,
things
and
like
I think this is something we were talking about earlier, but the thing that happens most of the time, the thing that the user wants to happen most of the time, should just happen by default. And then if the 10% of the time or 1% of the time that the user didn't want that to happen or wants it to happen differently, they should be able to then go in and change that rather than make them 90% of the time have to go in and do the same steps over and over.
Yeah, I think it's optimizing the software for the masses, right? For the mass type of things that you try and do. And I think, to be fair to, we're talking about the ribbon, I think that's what Microsoft tried to do. But you think that they deal with the entire spectrum of the market, different types of users, and it becomes very, very difficult. So maybe the best thing they could have done was just say, hey, this is our sample, but we've really focused on how the software will learn to create the ribbon bar based on the top 10 things you do.
Like in the ribbon, if there's a button that I never ever click on, then why doesn't it just disappear?
Just tear it off, drag it off.
Yeah.
Just as you do with a dock icon on.
Every time they do something like that, though, then I'm like, you go to use it.
Well, then it's like, where did that thing go?
Well, so if you explicitly remove something, then you're saying that you never use it, and probably the time that you want to use it is going to be hard.
Yeah, if you explicitly do it, but if Microsoft does it for you.
No. The thing isn't that Microsoft does it for you. It's that the software does it for you because it's tracking what you generally do. You can probably say there are 10 features or functions of Excel that you use, right? And yet you could go to an accountant, and they're going to use the things like the pivot tables and stuff, really complex stuff that Microsoft has worked on for years, and yet you don't need that stuff. It doesn't even need to be in your UI.
So, well, and over time, it could progressively do that sort of thing. Like, let's say, you open it 10 times and, nothing has changed. And then on the 11th time, like, something is a little bit smaller or is grayed out a little bit, or, it like progressively learns and indicates to the user feedback that it's learning what you're using and what you're not using.
So, when you're developing and deciding on features and how to implement them, so let's take this assumption that the platforms, the RA platforms, the server-side platforms are good enough that you don't have to deal with all those cumbersome details anymore. Are there specific, is there a specific way you go about saying how can we improve this, or is it just that generic question at the beginning and then the open-ended brainstorming, or is there some methodology that you apply?
Well, it's definitely no methodology.
And isn't this one of the big problems of RIAs? Is that there isn't a science
where do you start?
to it yet.
I can do better,
it's a total art.
Innovation doesn't have any methodology, right?
I agree with that.
So it's disruptive. It's someone who comes from the outside who said, I'm not going to follow the same rules that you guys are following.
So are there more questions you ask your
down.
team?
So we're not going to worry about scalability and performance and that kind of stuff. over time will improve because we're learning all the time.
So are there more questions other than how can it be better that you ask your team to get them to think differently, or there's got to be more to work from than just we want this to be better.
No, I mean, there's different areas to focus on, and with every release of software, there's new features, there's functional features that businesses want.
Sure.
But then sometimes you're just trying out new technology, which is essentially what we were doing when we did the egg gadgets, just to prove a couple of points. And you could make something as common as making a phone call a much simpler task, which, by the way, has to affect everybody.
Right.
CRM software. And we tried to solve a few other problems at the same time, which meant essentially no upgrades of the existing infrastructure, reusing services, trying not to force any configuration on the server to deploy the gadgets.
Yeah.
So we tried to deal with a number of problems. So
and you have to balance all those and figure out what has the biggest impact.
Yeah, and I think that if I was to talk to somebody from pharma or from insurance claims management, they'll come forward with a bunch of different things that they could improve. And you also have to recognise you're working within different constraints, different operating environments. So I mean, there's different technologies applied for different use cases. Earlier we were talking about using PDF forms. It's perfectly fine as user interface technology because it's something that's familiar to the mass population.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Everybody's seen a form in their life. They've had to fill one in.
Yeah.
And so if you have a user interface that looks like that form, then it's very easy to, very familiar for the end user to interact with. And you mentioned earlier about New York Times. I think what they've done is fantastic because they've put a very familiar metaphor on the screen, and they've done a really, really good job of it. And they tried to keep to the pure idea of what is paper and interact with this thing. And they could have lots of buttons and menu bars and drill downs and tabs and stuff. And I think the metaphor for that just takes work.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Definitely. Incremental improvement. And that's the incremental improvement is I think usually has pretty high value because we can radically change some things with new RA interfaces, but sometimes we can take it too far, and so sometimes we need an incremental improvement to get us there.
Yeah, I think even with the best tools and technologies, we can still create a hideous user interface. And I've seen some, and I've created some myself.
Me as well.
So
I think that's kind of the root of my question is how do we force ourselves to, as an industry, kind of come to grips with how to use these platforms,
but and not misuse them.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of, it sounded like you basically said a minute ago that you basically treated the server-side infrastructure and that existing stuff as legacy, but interface with it with some of the newer RA platforms. Is that?
I mean, I wouldn't say legacy. I mean, the thing is that you should look what the customers deploy and they've invested millions of dollars in. It's a very expensive proposition for them to move away from that, and it's questionable whether they should do that.
Yeah.
And quite often I see customers say, well, we've seen a better user interface at company X or Y, but there's less functionality. And you have to say, well, is there real value in you moving off to that platform?
Yeah, it's not just...
Or, can you achieve what you really want with a new technology? By the way, is all that you want to do is just do a faithful re-rendering of what you already have in a new technology, right? And then I give the example about Salesforce, which is a really good application, by the way. But the UI is no different from the kind of the thick clients we had back in the late 90s.
Right.
Well, so the opportunity is to use that RAA technology to deliver a different kind of user experience.
And that's one of the visions I feel like most of the RA vendors are selling is that you don't have to touch those things, but you can get some of the benefits.
Yeah.
It sounds like you guys have kind of lived that. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, certainly as an application group, and I'll be fair to Salesforce, they've done the same thing. We've been looking at how you can render the application using other products, right? So, we're building an Outlook client and allowing customers to build flex user interfaces on top of Seamless, making their job very, much easier.
Yeah.
And Salesforce has done the same thing.
Yeah.
Because there's a recognition.
Well,
Really, ultimately, the best user interface for the user is the one that they elect to use. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that this is something John and I have talked about pretty extensively. But I think that we're getting to this point where the way that a user interacts through software can be a variety of different means. It can be through the web. It can be through a desktop client. It can be through a mobile client. It can even be through picking up their phone and talking to an automated, voice system, through their TV, whatever. There's so many ways for people to interact with the same back-end data, but being able to decouple the back-end data. I mean, it's essentially client server, but reinvented so that we can really have different interfaces to the same data.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like you're saying, the best interface is in the browser. Sometimes it's on the desktop. Sometimes it's widgets. Sometimes it's Outlook plugins. Sometimes whatever. But it's up to the user to decide which way that they want to use it.
And ultimately, what you're trying to get is adoption of the enterprise application of the services and obviously getting the data in the system. And one thing I always talk to customers about is that having analytics is great only if the data is good. And if you've got one constituent of users who are using the application and another constituent who are not, because they're having usability problems, it could be a cultural problem, it could be a regional problem, then you're going to have skewed analytics.
Yep.
So the traditional transactional user interface is absolutely important. But I think there's an opportunity to use RIA to deliver different types of user interfaces for the end users, ones that are compelling. Give them more feedback and more progress on what they're doing and show them the value. You can't give them training. We talked about value earlier about what these applications do. You can't necessarily give them training, but you can give them feedback as to the progress of what's happening. It actually makes it more interactive to use.
Yeah.
Right. We talked about interactive applications for years, but there's not really much interaction. You fill the data in, hit submit, and it's gone.
Yeah.
It's definitely exciting what you can do.
Yeah.
On the implementation side, in terms of putting the new face on it, trying to innovate there, is the vision kind of reality? Is there pitfalls that you guys have run into? Is there?
Well, I think the pitfalls is that our imagination is limited, but the reality is there. I mean, the application suite really, I've struggled to find an application suite that isn't SOA enabled. But the application suite has been SOA enabled for quite a number of years, and that's SOAP-based web services. But the applications that we have are being REST enabled, and Oracle's been focusing here quite heavily. PeopleSoft is already RESTful service enabled, which makes it very easy to build RIA applications on top of the UI. Sorry,
Doing great. Thanks, Liz.
Can I drop
Yep.
this?
Sure. Yeah.
Here comes the bill. Bad news.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
So I mean, certainly where we've been focusing our efforts is really to make it easier for existing customers to build RIA applications on top of the existing services that they've already deployed. And you have to think that they're reaching a certain level of maturity where the processes are in place, the data, the data they want, and the analytics are in place. But now they're thinking about how to get more value from their CRM system.
Is it kind of a success story for our industry that really the data is decoupled and we really have reached some of those goals that?
I think we're just in the infancy.
Yeah.
Right,
I don't mean in terms of the complete app, but having the
fact that it actually has value is a huge improvement from where we were 10 years ago.
But to hear
10 years ago, no one cared about providing APIs or providing, just the data.
Well, but to hear that it's not becoming a huge thing to say, I'm going to throw this new UI on this system, and we do have this separation.
I think there's just a number of forces that are changing the way that we think about our applications. When we were the heyday of selling CRM and SFA, there were really, we talked about 3 channels, sales, service, and marketing. And what's happened over the last maybe 2 or 3 years is this explosion of channels. And a couple of years ago, we actually launched an application called Social CRM, and the whole focus was, tapping into the social fabric, the conversations that were going on there on the web. And it's a recognition that you don't own the storefront anymore, right? Just think about the vendors. You go into a store to find out about products, and then all of a sudden Google search happened and Amazon happened, and you can just go on the web and find out about products and find out which are the cheaper ones, and you hit the button and it will deliver. Right? And that's suddenly all of the manufacturers and distributors are suddenly removed. So the Best Buys of this world, or the Dixons or whatever, suddenly out of the equation. They're not part of the conversation. They're not seeing what customers are buying. Amazon sees that and Google sees that. So if you can't put your presence out there on the web, then you're basically irrelevant. Right? You're basically anonymous. And so that kind of changes the way that you think about how you're delivering your application. I don't think it's as easy to go out and build a storefront like that. I think I focus more on how I plug into Google AdSense and get discovered. So it does change the way that you think about what types of UIs you build. More componentized, that whatever you build needs to be consumed anywhere and everywhere, on any browser or in a desktop
PDF document.
In a PDF document, perfectly fine. Right? PDF is pretty good. It's secure. You can send secure information. You can time locked as well. It's really good, and it's universal. Everybody, I'm sure, is watching this video has seen a PDF document.
And if you're watching this video and you haven't yet updated your reader, update to 9.1.3. If you haven't updated your Flash player, update to 10.32.18, I think.
Did we get the Adobe
It's got a live Twitter feed.
This is important. This is important.
This is the Adobe sponsored portion of the.
This is a major security update to both reader and Flash player and Air. Update all three of those because there are security holes, known security vulnerabilities.
Did we get paid for that public service announcement?
This is just to benefit our readers.
I want to give Adobe.
This is not to benefit
send
Adobe.
me a check.
This is a public service.
John Rose,
This is a public service.
10237 East 31st Avenue. I want my check.
All right. I think
no more
it's been
mojitos.
Insightful for me.
They brought the check. We're supposed to leave.
The check. They've cut us off.
I think we're supposed to leave.
It's been great though. It's great to talk with you, Dipock. It's great to hear your perspective on the enterprise ecosystem, the value of RIAs.
Next time we'll film lunch.
Lunch was good, actually. Lunch conversation was good.
Sorry you missed out. Next time, join us.
Next time, join us, Mistral and Redwood Shores. It's been
Thank
good.
you.
All right.
James,
Bye-bye.
find a glass.
Cheers.